listening to the Video Game and Nerd Trivia Podcast with Tony D. Video Game and Nerd Trivia Podcast, your episodic dose of trivia covering all things video games and nerdy. Now, here's your host, Tony D.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Video Game and Nerd Trivia Podcast. I'm your host, Tony, and on every full episode, we do 30 questions of trivia on a topic about video games or nerd culture. And on today's episode, we're going to be going back in time and going back to the 90s. I was a 90s kid. And we're going to be going over Saturday morning shows in the 90s. So this could be cartoons or kids shows or things like that. So going to be 3 rounds. I'm going to give you a little question or a little scenario, and you tell me what the answer is to that question. How it works is I'll ask you a question, give you 5 seconds of silence, and then give you the answer. Alright, let's play. Round 1. Question 1. Who was the voice of Batman in the iconic Batman the Animated Series? This was the late Kevin Conroy. Question 2. Disney is bringing back this 90s animated show about a team of mutants at a school for the gifted. What series is this? So the series is X-Men the Animated Series, and they're bringing it back on Disney Plus as X-Men 97. Question 3. For the kids of the 90s, this show included what was basically our version of the first ever Spider-Verse. What show was this called? This was Spider-Man the Animated Series. It was kind of like the very last arc of the whole series before the series finale. It had this whole like Spider-Verse thing, and you saw all these different Spider-Man. All of them were working under Madam Web to kind of stop one of the other Spider-Man. It was pretty cool. Question 4. The intro to this highly popular anime cartoon series was called Rock the Dragon. What show was this? This was Dragon Ball Z. Question 5. The theme song for this 90s cartoon, based on an anime, had the catchphrase, "Gotta catch 'em all." Which show was this? This is of course Pokemon. Question 6. This spin-off cartoon series focused on 2 genetically enhanced rodents at the Acme Labs research facility. What show was this? This was Pinky and the Brain. I loved this show growing up. Question 7. This cartoon series featured an older Bruce Wayne training a young Terry McGinnis to take over as the new Gotham Knight. What show was this? This was Batman Beyond. Question 8. This Steven Spielberg produced cartoon had a wide cast of characters that parodied everything from silent films to The Godfather, but in a kid-friendly atmosphere. Which show is this? This is The Animaniacs, which also got a revival on Hulu. Question 9. This cartoon series was based off a sci-fi movie franchise starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. Which show was this? This was Men in Black. Question 10. This spin-off of Transformers focused on Optimus Primal and his crew of Maximals against the villainous Predacons. Later, this show would get a secondary series continuing the story. Which show was this? So this was Beast Wars, and later on they had a continuation called Beast Machines. Alright, let's head to round 2. Question 1. Power Rangers had many different versions throughout the years, where each one had a different story, but back in the beginning, the series had one overarching story that ended after 6 seasons. What was the name of the Power Rangers season in 1998 that ended the Zordon era? This was Power Rangers in Space. Question 2. Based on the 1978 parody film, this cartoon series focused on fruits that became murderous and evil, waging war against humans. Which show is this? This is Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. It had a very catchy intro song too. Question 3. This cartoon series was semi-based on the life of Louis Anderson as a young kid, and the comedian provided his own voice for his younger self. Which show was this? This was Life with Louie. Question 4. There was a short-lived Spider-Man animated series spin-off where Peter Parker gets sent to another dimension to go against the High Evolutionary. He received a new nanotechnology suit with additional powers like cloaking, and it had a web cape as well. What was the name of this series? This was Spider-Man Unlimited. Question 5. This show was created for WB Kids to meet FCC requirements for educational and informational content for children. This one focusing on satire and slapstick comedy about major historical events or figures. Which show was this? This was Hysteria. Question 6. This show brought the world's greatest detective into the 2100s, complete with a robotic Dr. Watson as his confidant. What show was this? This was Sherlock Holmes of the 22nd Century. This also had a really catchy song. Actually, a lot of these 90s shows had really catchy intro songs. Question 7. This cartoon was based on a video game where a soil-dwelling invertebrate got a hold of a powerful spacesuit that made him become a hero, fighting an evil villain in the form of Bob the Killer Goldfish. What show was this? This was Earthworm Jim. Question 8. When Pokemon was extremely popular, another similar anime about monsters was released on Fox Kids, though the monsters were able to all talk to their respective trainers in English. What was this show called? This was Digimon Digital Monsters, again with a very catchy intro song. Alright, question 9. This cartoon show on Fox Kids featured a song by Iggy Pop, and it was called Monster Men, and the lyrics of this song, Monster Men, were basically the premise of the show. So here are the lyrics. 5 little monsters were riding through space, their spaceship broke and they fell into this place. They gotta get out, but they don't know how, so they're waiting and waiting in this creepy, creepy house. Which show is this? This was Space Goofs. Such a weird show. It was a French show, I think, and it was translated to English. And question 10. This show was a sister show to Power Rangers, but it starred 3 superheroes. Originally, it was supposed to feature Jason David Frank and was called Cybertron, before he was pulled back into the Power Rangers series. What was the name of this show? This is VR Troopers. Alright, let's head into the last round here. Round 3, question 1. This was a Disney show in which an anthropomorphic duck suited up to be a vigilante that strikes fear in the night, similar to Batman. What show was this? This was Darkwing Duck. Question 2. This show was based off an anime series called Gatchaman and ran from 1996 to 1997. Specifically, it was based on Gatchaman 2 and Gatchaman Fighter. What show was this? This was Eagle Riders. Question 3. This cartoon was based on a wrestling anime that starred characters with weird names like Kid Muscle and Kevin Mask. What show was this? This was Ultimate Muscle. I thought this was really funny because it was basically an anime about wrestling, but wrestling in the sense that they had superpowers and stuff. And the names were like all puns of, wrestlers that were famous at the time. Like Kevin Mask, I always laughed at because he was like the main villain, if you will. And it's funny because Kevin Mask is obviously based on Kevin Nash, and Kevin Nash was part of the NWO in wrestling. And even Kevin Mask had a t-shirt or logo that he would like represent his faction, which is the DMP. But the DMP was basically the NWO logo, but they replaced it with the letters DMP. So it was pretty funny that they parodied that whole thing. But anyway, let's move on to the next question. Question 4. This show is about a purple cartoon feline who lives in Metropolis, and his motto is, "It never hurts to help." His name is also an onomatopoeia. What show was this? This was Eek the Cat. Question 5. Similar to Goosebumps, this show was about creepy and scary things happening, but unlike Goosebumps, this show followed best friends Marshall Teller and Simon Holmes, and the name of the show is the location that the show takes place in and where all these creepy things happen. What show was this? I really liked the show. This was Erie, Indiana. It didn't last that long, but after they finished their run, they actually had another spin-off called Erie, Indiana, The Other Dimension. And it kind of just continued with the whole idea of weird things happening in a town, but now it's in the same town in a different dimension with a different cast of characters. Alright, question 6. Which fictional cartoon show was a magical fantasy adventure show where the two main characters are based on a real-life magician duo? This was an interesting one. This was Siegfried and Roy, Masters of the Impossible. Question 7. Which cartoon show was about a boy and his family in which Howie Mandel voiced one of the characters and also had a live action sequence in which he played himself in some of those episodes? This was Bobby's World. Question 8. Based on the anime Kyoto Ninden Teyandi, this 1990 cartoon show was based in Little Tokyo and starred 3 cybernetic feline characters named Speedy, Polly, and Guido. They fought against a villain known as the Big Cheese. Which show was this? This was Samurai Pizza Cats. Question 9. Which cartoon show had humanoid birds suit up and fight villains with hockey gear? This was The Mighty Ducks, the animated series. And finally, question 10. Which cartoon show had humanoid rodents in space riding 2-wheeled machines? This would be Biker Mice from Mars. Alright, so those were the questions I had for this episode. I totally relived my childhood just going through and trying to find all these shows and write questions about them. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you're a 90s kid like me, hopefully you really enjoyed that and got reminded of things that you kind of forgot about. But yeah, again, thank you so much for continuing to listen to this podcast. Again, reach out to me on our social media on VGNT Podcast. The only social media that we have a different handle on is Instagram, which is VGNT Podcast 1. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to reach out, suggest topics, and I'll try to get those questions in to make a future episode. But until next time, thank you again, Trivia on!